A terrified 6-year-old boy huddled against a fallen log in the dense forest, tears streaming down his face, lost and alone as darkness began to fall. When a pack of 5 German shepherds emerged from the trees and surrounded him, everyone feared the worst. But what these highly trained service dogs did next not only saved the child's life, but transformed a broken veteran's soul and united an entire rural community in ways no one could have imagined. The extraordinary events that unfolded in those crucial hours will leave you speechless. If you're ready for a story that will touch your heart to its core, keep watching. Before we continue this incredible journey, tell us where you're tuning in from in the comments below. And if this story moves you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something truly special just for you. The morning had started like any other in the small mountain town of Pinehaven. Nestled between the imposing peaks of the Cascade Range and acres of protected forest, the community of just under 5,000 people was the kind of place where neighbors still knew each other's names and children played outdoors until sunset. Called them home. For retired Army Captain Lucas Reeves, these peaceful surroundings had been both salvation and prison since returning from his 3rd deployment 14 months ago. At 35, Lucas carried wounds both visible and hidden. The jagged scar that ran from his left temple to jawline told only part of his story. The deeper scars, the ones that woke him at 3 a.m. with his heart hammering and sheets soaked. In sweat, those were the wounds that had proven more resistant to healing. The modest cabin Lucas had inherited from his grandfather sat on 3 acres at the edge of town, bordering the vast Pinehaven National Forest. Its isolation suited him. After the chaos of combat, after losing 4 men from his unit in a single firefight outside Kandahar, Lucas craved solitude, needed it. The constant vigilance, the hyper-awareness that had kept him alive in combat zones, had become a curse in civilian life, making crowded spaces and unexpected noises nearly unbearable. The cabin's large fenced yard had become home to his most successful attempt at healing, a German Shepherd breeding and training program focused exclusively on developing service dogs for veterans suffering from PTSD and physical disabilities. What had started as personal therapy with a single dog named Shadow, given to him by a fellow veteran, had grown into a small but respected operation, housing 5 fully trained German Shepherds and occasionally their carefully bred puppies. "Good morning, team," Lucas said, his voice still carrying the authoritative tone from his military days as he stepped onto the back porch. 5 alert German Shepherds, Shadow, Valor, Liberty, Scout, and the youngest, Ranger, sat in perfect formation, their intelligent eyes fixed on Lucas with unwavering attention. They were his pride, each dog representing hundreds of hours of specialized training. Shadow, now 7, had been Lucas's lifeline in those first dark months after medical discharge. The others had followed as Lucas discovered his gift for training service animals, each dog eventually placed with a veteran in need somewhere across the country. The current 5 were his working team, almost ready for permanent placement except the Ranger, who at just under 2 years old was still completing his training. Lucas checked his watch. Solo 700 hours, time for morning exercises. Daily routine was essential for both him and the dogs, a structured framework that provided security and purpose. He moved toward the gate that opened to the training field, the dogs maintaining their disciplined formation behind him. The morning training session proceeded with military precision, each dog demonstrating the skills that would one day help a traumatized veteran navigate civilian life, retrieving items, providing physical support, creating protective space in crowded environments, and most impressively, responding to signs of emotional distress by providing calming pressure and alerts. "Good work, Shadow," Lucas praised, as the senior dog perfectly executed a complex sequence of commands, including retrieving Lucas's phone and pressing against his legs when Lucas simulated anxiety symptoms. The dog's response was immediate and calming, a living embodiment of unconditional support. Lucas had just begun Ranger's advanced training session when his phone rang. The name on the screen, Mayor Wilson, caused an immediate tightening in his chest. Social calls were rare in Lucas's life, and calls from authority figures usually meant complications. "Reeves," he answered, his voice clipped. "Lucas, thank God you picked up." Mayor Wilson's voice carried an urgency that immediately put Lucas on alert. "We've got a situation. Tyler Mason's boy, Aiden, he's missing." Lucas straightened, his mind shifting automatically to tactical assessment mode. "How long?" "School bus dropped him at the end of his road around 3:30 yesterday. Mother was working a double shift at the hospital. Babysitter fell asleep. Kid never made it to the house. Search started around 6 p.m. when his mom got home, but we lost daylight. Sheriff's Department searched all night with no luck." Lucas processed this information rapidly. Aiden Mason, 6 years old, small for his age, quiet kid from what little Lucas had seen during infrequent trips to town. The Mason property backed up to the national forest, miles of dense woodland that could swallow a full-grown man, let alone a first grader. "You're calling about the dogs," Lucas stated, already knowing where this conversation was heading. "We've got volunteers, sheriff's deputies, Forest Service, but no trained search and rescue. Nearest CR team is 3 hours out and delayed by the landslide on Highway 16. Your dogs are our best hope, Lucas." Lucas felt his heart rate accelerate, sweat forming at his temples despite the cool morning air. He hadn't been in a crisis situation since Afghanistan, hadn't worked with civilians, hadn't been responsible for a search operation. His dogs were trained for service, not search and rescue, though the foundation skills were similar. "Mayor, my dogs aren't certified for SR work. They're service animals." The excuse sounded hollow even to his own ears. "Lucas," the mayor's voice softened, "that boy has been alone in the woods all night. Temperatures dropped to 40 degrees. There's supposed to be rain moving in this afternoon. We're running out of time." The weight of those words hung in the silence that followed. Lucas closed his eyes, fighting the familiar tightness in his chest. Memories threatened to surface. Of another search, of bodies hidden by terrain, of arriving too late. He forced them back, focusing on his breathing as his therapist had taught him. "Lucas, are you there?" "I'll bring the dogs," he said finally. "Text me the coordinates for the command post. We'll be there in 20. After ending the call, Lucas stood motionless for several moments, center of his training field. The dogs watched him, sensing the shift in his energy, waiting for direction. Could he do this? Enter a high-pressure situation, work with a team of strangers, take responsibility for finding a child who might already be? No. He shut down that thought. Focus on the immediate tasks, equipment, provisions, dogs, moving with renewed purpose. Lucas retrieved 5 specialized vests from the equipment shed. These weren't the standard service dog vests, but more robust tactical models he'd designed himself, equipped with small storage pouches, reflective striping, and attachment points for additional gear. Each vest bore the dog's name and Lucas's, and contact information, a precaution he'd implemented after Shadow had once slipped away during a thunderstorm. "Shadow, Valor, Liberty, Scout, Ranger, gear up," he commanded, holding each vest for the corresponding dog to step into. The animals responded with practiced precision, understanding that the vests signaled important work ahead. Lucas packed a rucksack with essential supplies: first aid kit, water bottles, energy bars, extra leads, and a thermal blanket. His military training automatically kicked in, prioritizing mission-critical equipment while keeping weight manageable. He added a final item, a worn, stuffed dinosaur that had been left behind by his nephew during a rare family visit. Something soft, something comforting might help if they found the boy in a distressed state. The drive to the search area took exactly 18 minutes, each second amplifying Lucas's anxiety. As he navigated the winding forest road in his modified pickup truck, the dogs sat calmly in their secured positions in the extended cab, trained to maintain composure during transport. Through the rearview mirror, Lucas could see Shadow's eyes fixed on him, the dog's steady presence a reminder of why he needed to push through his own fears. The command post came into view, a collection of vehicles parked at a Forest Service fire road. Sheriff's Department SUVs, volunteer firefighter trucks, and civilian vehicles created a makeshift perimeter. People moved with purpose, some in uniform, others in the practical outdoor gear typical of Pinehaven residents. A map was spread across the hood of the sheriff's cruiser, surrounded by concerned faces. Lucas pulled up beside the command post, taking a final moment to center himself before exiting the vehicle. He ran through a quick mental checklist of commands and signals the dogs would need for this unplanned mission, then opened his door. "Lucas!" Sheriff Bennett strode toward him, hand extended. The men had a nodding acquaintance. Lucas occasionally saw Bennett at the town's only diner, but had never worked together. "Thank you for coming. Situation's getting critical." Lucas nodded, already surveying the scene with a tactician's eye. "What's the search parameter?" "We've covered about 3 square miles around the point last seen," Bennett explained, leading Lucas to the map. "Highway to the south, river to the east. Focus has been north and west, following the most logical path if the boy was trying to get home." Lucas studied the map, noting the topographical features, water sources, and areas already covered by search teams. "Any belongings of the boys for scent?" A woman stepped forward, dark circles under her red-rimmed eyes, speaking of a sleepless night of terror. Lucas recognized Sarah Mason, Aiden's mother, a nurse at Pinehaven Medical Center. "I brought these," she said, holding out a small backpack and a well-worn sweatshirt. He was wearing the backpack yesterday. The shirt was from his hamper. "It hasn't been washed," Lucas nodded, accepting the items with care. "Ms. Mason, I'm Lucas Reeves. My dogs aren't traditional search and rescue, but they're highly trained and responsive. We'll do everything possible to find Aiden." Sarah nodded, visibly fighting to maintain composure. "The sheriff says you work with veterans, trained service dogs." "Yes, ma'am. My brother served 2 tours in Iraq." She paused, seeming to gather strength from the connection. "He said the best men he knew were the ones who understood both courage and fear." Lucas felt something tighten in his chest. Recognition, perhaps, or the weight of her trust. He managed a short nod before turning back to the operational details. "I'll need to work with my dogs as a unit. They're trained to communicate with each other and with me in specific ways. We should take the northwest quadrant. It's the most challenging terrain, and my team is conditioned for difficult ground." Sheriff A. Bennett looked skeptical. "You want to go alone? Standard protocol is to pair searches." "My dogs work best without distraction," Lucas explained. "We'll maintain radio contact." He tapped the communications equipment on his belt, another remnant of his military preparedness. After a brief discussion of search patterns and emergency protocols, Lucas returned to his truck to prepare the dogs. He opened the rear door, and all 5 German shepherds jumped down in ordered sequence, forming a semicircle around him, awaiting instructions. Lucas knelt, presenting Aiden's sweatshirt for each dog to scent in turn. "Find," he commanded, the dog's attention sharpening visibly at the instruction. This wasn't their specialized training, but the foundation skills were there, tracking, alerting, focusing on human scent. As he prepared to deploy with his team, Lucas became aware of the gathered searchers, watching with a mixture of hope and doubt. He recognized their expressions, the same looks he'd received from villagers in Afghanistan when his unit arrived after Taliban incursions. Desperate hope mixed with skepticism that help had arrived too late. "We'll find him," Lucas said to Sarah Mason, the promise escaping before he could qualify it. Her eyes locked with his, a mother's desperate faith, transferring an unspoken covenant between them. With a quick hand signal, Lucas directed his team toward the northwestern search. Grid. The 5 German shepherds moved with coordinated precision, fanning out in a search pattern while maintaining visual contact with each other and with Lucas. They entered the dense forest as a single unit, leaving behind the murmurs and worried. Glances of the command post. The forest closed around them, dappled morning light filtering through the thick canopy of pine and spruce. Lucas felt his senses heighten. The smell of damp earth and resin, the distant call of birds, the soft pad of the dog's paws on the needle-covered forest floor. For the first time since receiving the mayor's call, his anxiety began to recede, replaced by the focused alertness he'd relied on in combat zones. "Find Aiden," he repeated, his voice low but commanding. "Find the boy." The dogs moved with purpose, noses working, covering ground efficiently while maintaining their relative positions. Shadow, the most experienced, took the lead position, while Ranger, still in training, stayed closest to Lucas. They ascended a ridge, navigating fallen trees and rocky outcroppings with an agility that allowed them to cover difficult terrain, faster than the human search teams could manage. An hour into the search, the radio on Lucas's belt crackled. "Any signs, Reeves?" Sheriff Bennett's voice carried both hope and strain. "Negative," Lucas responded, continuing northwest along Cedar Ridge. He checked his GPS, confirming their position and the ground they'd covered. The search area was vast, the forest dense and disorienting for a small child. If Aiden had wandered off the main trails, if he'd become frightened and irrational, if he'd sought shelter in a place not easily visible. Lucas pushed away the spiraling thoughts, focusing instead on the dogs and their methodical work. They were his anchor, their disciplined movements keeping him grounded in the present mission. It was Scout who caught the first sign, the black and tan shepherd suddenly lifting her head, nose working more intensively at a particular spot. Near a fallen log, Lucas moved quickly to her position, finding a small candy wrapper caught between rocks. A Reese's peanut butter cup. He remembered seeing similar wrappers in the boy's backpack. "Good girl, Scout," he praised, quietly recording the GPS coordinates and radioing the find to the command post. It wasn't much, but it confirmed they were on the right track and gave the search renewed focus. The sky darkened as they pressed on, the promised rain beginning as a light mist that gradually intensified. Lucas checked his watch. The boy had now been missing for nearly 24 hours, had spent a night alone in the forest, and was facing increasingly challenging weather conditions. Hypothermia would be a serious concern, especially for a small child. The terrain grew more difficult as they continued northwest, the forest floor rising into a series of rocky outcroppings. Lucas noted that they were approaching one of the areas on the map marked with hazard symbols, a section with several small cliffs and deep ravines carved by seasonal runoff. "Careful," he cautioned the dogs, though they needed no warning. Their training had included work on various terrains, and they navigated the challenges with instinctive caution. The rain intensified, reducing visibility and dampening scents. Lucas felt the familiar tightness returning to his chest. Conditions deteriorating, chances diminishing with each passing hour, the weight of responsibility pressing down. He forced himself to maintain steady breathing, to focus on the systematic search pattern rather than the growing fear of failure. It was then that Shadow froze, head high, ears forward in alert posture. The other dogs immediately responded to his signal, their movements becoming more focused, convergent. Lucas felt a surge of adrenaline. This wasn't just interest in a scent, this was recognition. "What is it, boy?" Lucas moved forward, scanning the area ahead. Lucas moved carefully toward the edge, signaling the dogs to hold position. The descent would be challenging enough without managing 5 German shepherds simultaneously. He quickly assessed the situation. The ledge appeared stable, but narrow. The ravine walls were slick with rain and scattered with loose rocks. Getting down would require careful navigation. Bringing Aidan back up would demand even more skill. "I'm scared," Aidan called up, his small voice nearly lost in the sound of rain hitting the forest canopy. "I know you are," Lucas responded, maintaining a calm, reassuring tone despite his own adrenaline surge. "But I'm coming to get you, and my dogs are keeping watch. We're going to bring you home." Lucas began his descent, testing each foothold before committing his weight. Years of military training had included cliff work and extraction exercises, skills he'd never expected to need again in civilian life. The wet rock face made progress treacherous, but he moved with methodical precision, constantly aware of the frightened child watching his every move. From above, the 5 German shepherds maintained their vigilant formation, occasional low whines expressing their concern and focus. Shadow, the most experienced of the pack, had positioned himself directly above where Aidan huddled, as if understanding the need to maintain visual reassurance for the boy. "The dogs are watching over us," Lucas called down, noting how Aidan's gaze kept returning to the shepherds. "They're very smart. They helped me find you." "They won't bite me?" Aidan asked, his voice small but steadier than before. "No, they're trained to help people," Lucas assured him, now about halfway down the ravine face. "They're service dogs. They work with people who need special help." The boy seemed to absorb this information, his crying quieting to occasional sniffles. Lucas continued his careful descent, maintaining a steady stream of calm conversation, a technique he'd learned for both frightened children and combat-stressed soldiers. Keep them engaged, keep them focused on your voice rather than their fear. When Lucas finally reached the ledge, he found Aidan pressed against the rock wall, shivering visibly, his clothes soaked through from the night's exposure and the intensifying rain. The boy's face was scratched, dirt-streaked and pale with cold and fear, but Lucas's quick assessment revealed no obvious serious injuries. "Hi there," Lucas said gently, kneeling to bring himself to Aidan's eye level. "I'm Lucas. Can you tell me if you're hurt anywhere?" Aidan shook his head, then hesitantly pointed to his ankle. "I fell. It hurts a little." Lucas carefully examined the ankle, finding it swollen but not severely deformed, likely a mild sprain rather than a break. "We can take care of that," he assured Aidan, then opened his pack to retrieve the thermal blanket. Wrapping the reflective material around the boy's shoulders, Lucas radioed an update to the command post. "I've reached the child. Minor injuries. Only ankle sprain, mild exposure, otherwise appears in good condition. Beginning extraction procedure." The radio crackled with immediate responses, Sheriff Bennett acknowledging the update professionally, another voice coordinating medical support, and cutting through the technical exchanges, Sarah Mason's tearful, thank God," Lucas turned his attention back to Aidan, who had stopped shivering slightly under the thermal blanket. "I bet you're hungry," he said, retrieving an energy bar from his pack. As the boy ate with the sudden intensity of a child who'd missed several meals, Lucas explained his extraction plan. "I'm going to carry you up on my back," he told Aidan. "It's like a piggyback ride, but you'll need to hold on tight and do exactly what I tell you. Can you do that?" Aidan nodded, his expression serious beyond his years. Lucas was impressed by the child's resilience. After nearly 24 hours alone in the forest, a night of exposure, and a fall into a ravine, the boy was showing remarkable composure. "There's something else I brought for you," Lucas said, reaching into his pack again. He withdrew the stuffed dinosaur, slightly squashed from being packed, but instantly recognizable to a 6-year-old as a comfort object. Aidan's eyes widened slightly, the first hint of childlike response Lucas had seen. "Is it for me?" "It's sure." Lucas confirmed, handing over the worn green T-Rex. "He can ride up with us." The boy clutched the dinosaur with one hand while finishing the energy bar with the other. Above them, the German shepherds maintained their watch, occasionally, shifting position but never abandoning their protective formation. Their presence seemed to reassure Aiden, who kept glancing up at them between bites. Once the boy had finished eating and had some water from Lucas's canteen, they prepared for the ascent. Lucas secured the radio and remaining equipment, then knelt with his back to Aiden. "Arms around my neck, legs around my waist," he instructed, "like a koala bear on a tree, and hold on to your dinosaur." Aiden complied, his small arms circling Lucas's neck with surprising strength. The child was lighter than Lucas had expected, a sobering reminder of how vulnerable a 6-year-old was in such harsh conditions. "We're coming up," Lucas called to the dogs, who immediately responded with increased alertness. Shadow and Valor moving closer to the edge to monitor their progress. The ascent proved more challenging than the descent. Lucas had to find secure handholds while supporting Aiden's weight and protecting him from scraping against the rock face. Each movement was carefully calculated, each foothold tested before committing. About halfway up, he felt Aiden's grip beginning to weaken. "Tell me about your dinosaur," Lucas prompted, needing to keep the boy engaged and holding on. "What's his name?" "Rex," Aiden replied after a moment's consideration. "Because he's a T-Rex." "Good name," Lucas approved, using the conversation to distract both of them from the precarious climb. "Rex, the T-Rex. Is he brave?" "He's scared of thunderstorms," Aiden confided, his grip tightening slightly as he focused on the story rather than the height. "But he's brave about everything else." "That's good," Lucas continued, finding another handhold and pulling them up another foot. "Everyone's scared of something, even brave people." "Are you scared of something?" Aiden asked, the innocent question, striking deeper than the child could know. Lucas paused before answering, testing another foothold. "Yes," he said finally, "I get scared sometimes, but having my dogs helps me be brave, like Rex helps me." Aiden concluded with a child's perfect logic. "Exactly like that," Lucas agreed, grateful for the intuitive understanding that only children seem capable of. They were nearing the top now, the edge of the ravine just a few feet above. Looking up, Lucas could see Shadow and Valor watching intently, as if ready to assist if needed. The rain had intensified, making the final section of the climb particularly treacherous. "Almost there," Lucas encouraged Aiden, feeling the boy's arms tightening around his neck in response. Just as they approached the edge, Lucas's right foothold, a small outcropping of rock, crumbled under his weight. For a heart-stopping moment, they began to slide backward, Aiden's frightened cry piercing the air as Lucas scrambled for purchase on the slick rock face. What happened next would later be described by Lucas as unlike anything I've seen, even in military canine units. Shadow, reacting with extraordinary speed, lunged forward and grabbed the shoulder strap of Lucas's pack in his powerful jaws. Simultaneously, Valor seized another section of the pack, while the other 3 dogs moved into supporting positions, their bodies creating a living anchor. The combined strength of the 5 German shepherds halted Lucas and Aiden's backward slide. With their stabilizing presence, Lucas regained his footing and pulled them up the final few feet to safety. As they reached solid ground, Aiden still clinging to Lucas's back, the 5 dogs maintained their disciplined formation despite what must have been a powerful instinct to cluster around in excitement. Lucas carefully lowered Aiden to the ground, checking him again for any injuries sustained during the climb. "You okay, buddy?" he asked, noting with relief that the boy, though obviously frightened by the near fall, appeared physically unharmed. Aiden nodded, then looked at the German shepherds with new appreciation. "Your dogs saved us." "They did," Lucas agreed, turning to the dogs with genuine pride. "Good work, team. At this acknowledgement, Shadow approached and gently nudged Lucas's hand, his typical check-in behavior after completing a task. The other dogs remained in formation, awaiting further instructions. "Can I pet them?" Aiden asked hesitantly, clutching his dinosaur with one hand. "Let's introduce you properly," Lucas said, gesturing Shadow forward. "This is Shadow. He's the leader of the team. Shadow, meet Aiden." Shadow approached with impressive gentleness, lowering his head to the child's level without any sign of the intensity he'd shown during the rescue. Aiden reached out a trembling hand and lightly touched the dog's head. "Hi, Shadow," he whispered. "Thank you for helping." One by one, Lucas introduced each dog, having them approach individually for a brief, controlled interaction with Aiden. The boy's initial fear transformed into wonder as each powerful animal demonstrated perfect manners and gentle awareness of his small size. "They're like superheroes," Aiden declared after meeting Ranger, the youngest of the group. "They are," Lucas agreed, picking up his radio to update the command post. "We've completed extraction and are heading back. Child is ambulatory but has a minor ankle injury. Request medical team standing by at command post." With acknowledgement received, Lucas prepared for the journey back. The rain was falling steadily now, and despite the thermal blanket, Aiden was still at risk for hypothermia. The most efficient route would be to carry him, but Lucas needed his hands free to navigate the difficult terrain. "Aiden, how would you feel about riding on my shoulders?" he suggested. "That way your hurt ankle won't have to do any work." The boy nodded, clearly tired, but still clutching his dinosaur determinedly. Lucas lifted him up, settling him securely on his shoulders. "Hold on to my head if you need to," he instructed, "and tell me if you start feeling too cold or tired." With Aiden positioned, Lucas turned to the dogs. "Formation," he commanded, using hand signals to establish their travel. Arrangement. Shadow took point, with Valor and Liberty flanking, Scout taking right rear position, and Ranger at left rear, a protective diamond around Lucas and the child. The return journey proved challenging in the worsening weather. The rain had transformed parts of the forest floor into slick mud, and water runoff was creating new obstacles with each passing minute. Lucas moved carefully, constantly aware of the precious cargo on his shoulders and the need to maintain a pace that his canine team could sustain while remaining alert. Despite these challenges, they made faster progress than during the search phase. The dogs seemed to understand the urgency, maintaining their protective formation while efficiently navigating the safest path forward. Lucas found himself relying on their instincts as much as his own training, particularly when crossing streams swollen with rainwater or navigating fallen trees. But halfway back to the command post, Aiden's head began to droop against Lucas's, his small body growing heavier with exhaustion. The day's events, coming after a night alone in the forest, were finally overwhelming the boy's remarkable resilience. "Stay with me, Aiden," Lucas encouraged, reaching up to steady the child. "Tell me about school. What's your favorite subject?" "Art," came the mumbled reply. "And science. We're learning about dinosaurs." "Like Rex?" Lucas prompted, needing to keep the boy conscious and alert. "Rex is a carnivore," Aiden informed him with surprising clarity given his exhausted state. "That means he eats meat." "That's right," Lucas confirmed, deliberately engaging the boy in conversation as they continued their careful progress through the rain-soaked forest. "What other dinosaurs do you know about?" The simple question launched Aiden into a detailed, if somewhat disjointed, explanation of various dinosaur species, their diets, and their habitats. Lucas listened attentively, asking questions when the boy's voice began to fade, using the child's enthusiasm for the subject to keep him awake and distracted from discomfort. Throughout this impromptu paleontology lesson, the German shepherds maintained their vigilant escort, occasionally adjusting their positions to account for terrain changes, but never breaking formation. Their discipline was remarkable. Not once did they chase after forest wildlife or become distracted by the numerous scents and sounds that must have tempted their keen senses. As they approached the final ridge before the command post, Lucas's radio crackled to life. "Reeves, what's your position?" Sheriff Bennett's voice carried a mix of professional concern and personal worry. "Approximately 10 minutes out," Lucas reported, shifting Aiden slightly to maintain balance as they navigated. "A particularly steep section. Child is conscious but fatigued. Dogs are performing admirably. Medical team is standing by," Bennett confirmed. "And Reeves, Mason's mother, is here. Well, just be prepared for an emotional reception." Lucas acknowledged the warning, understanding its implications. In his military career, he'd witnessed many reunions, the joyful chaos when separated families reconnected, the overwhelming relief when the missing were found. Such moments were raw, unfiltered emotion, unpredictable in their expression but always intense. "Aiden," he said, reaching up to gently squeeze the boy's leg, "we're almost there. Your mom is waiting for you." The child stirred from his dinosaur-focused monologue. "Mom's there." "She sure is," Lucas confirmed. "She's been looking for you all night and all day." "Is she mad?" Aiden asked in a small voice that reminded Lucas sharply of just how young and vulnerable the boy truly was. "No, buddy, she's not mad," Lucas assured him with absolute certainty. "She's just happy you're safe." They crested the final ridge, and the command post came into view below them, a collection of vehicles with emergency lights creating pulsing islands of color in the gray downpour. Even from a distance, Lucas could see increased activity as someone spotted their approach and alerted the others. "Almost home," Lucas told Aiden, feeling the boy straighten slightly on his shoulders. As they descended toward the command post, Lucas gave a hand signal to the dogs. "Close formation," he commanded, bringing the German shepherds into a tighter, protective unit around them. This wasn't military protocol or service dog training. It was Lucas's instinctive response to the approaching crowd, wanting to ensure Aiden wasn't overwhelmed in the crucial final moments of their journey. The first to reach them was a paramedic, rain gear gleaming wet in the emergency lights. "We'll take him from here," the medic began, reaching for Aiden with professional efficiency. The boy's arms tightened around Lucas's head. "No, I want to stay with him and the dogs." Before Lucas could respond, the crowd parted and Sarah Mason rushed forward, her face a study in pure relief and longing. At the sight of his mother, Aiden's resistance evaporated. Lucas carefully lifted the boy from his shoulders and set him on the ground, supporting him as Sarah dropped to her knees in the mud and pulled her son into a fierce embrace. My baby," she repeated, her words barely distinguishable through sobs. Aiden clung to her with one arm, the stuffed dinosaur still clutched firmly in his other hand. Lucas stepped back, giving mother and child their moment of reunion. The 5 German shepherds remained in perfect formation behind him, their disciplined presence creating a protective semicircle that seemed to hold the gathering crowd at a respectful distance. Rain continued to fall steadily, but no one appeared to notice, all eyes fixed on the emotional scene unfolding before them. After several moments, a paramedic gently approached again. "Miss Mason, we need to check Aiden. Get him warmed up and make sure he's okay." Sarah nodded, reluctantly loosening her grip on her son. As the medical team moved in with blankets and equipment, Aiden looked back over his shoulder at Lucas and the dogs, his expression a mixture of gratitude and concern about being separated from his rescuers. "It's okay," Lucas assured him. "The medics need to check you over. My team and I will be right here." Sheriff Bennett approached Lucas, extending a hand that was immediately accepted in a firm handshake. "Remarkable work, Reeves. The terrain out there is treacherous, even in good weather. To find him in these conditions." The sheriff shook his head in disbelief. "The dogs did the real work," Lucas responded, instinctively deflecting praise in a manner ingrained by years of military service. "They're the ones who tracked him and located the ravine." "Maybe so, but you're the one who trained them and made the descent to get him." Bennett surveyed the 5 shepherds with newfound respect. "I've worked with county K9 units for 15 years, but I've never seen dogs perform like this without SR certification." Lucas offered no response beyond a slight nod. The adrenaline that had sustained him throughout the search and rescue was beginning to ebb, leaving in its wake the familiar hollow feeling that followed high-stress operations. His body remembered this pattern from combat. The surge that carried you through the mission, then the crash that came when the job was done and the cost could finally be tallied. The sheriff seemed to recognize the signs, perhaps from his own experiences with critical incidents. "Get your team out of this rain," he suggested, gesturing toward a canvas awning that had been set up near the command vehicles. "There's hot coffee and some food. You've earned it." With a hand signal to the dogs, Lucas moved toward the offered shelter. The shepherds followed in precise formation, their discipline unbroken despite the excitement around them. Several volunteers stepped aside as the team passed, murmuring appreciative comments and casting impressed glances at the dogs. Under the awning, a volunteer handed Lucas a steaming cup of coffee. He accepted it with thanks, the warmth seeping into his cold, numbed fingers. Another volunteer approached cautiously, holding several towels. "For the dogs," she explained. "If that's allowed?" Lucas nodded, suddenly aware of how soaked his canine partners were. "Thank you. Shadow, Valor, Liberty. Scout Ranger, break formation!" At the command, the 5 shepherds relaxed their rigid positioning, though they remained attentive and close. Lucas demonstrated how to approach each dog, showing the volunteers how to towel them off without triggering any protective responses. The shepherds accepted the attention with stoic patience, occasionally shaking their coats and sending water droplets flying. As Lucas sipped his coffee and monitored his team, Mayor Wilson appeared at his side. The older man's expression was a mixture of exhaustion and profound relief. "The entire town will be talking about this for years," the mayor said without preamble. "A child lost in the national forest, rescued by a veteran and his service dogs. It's the kind of story that reminds people why small communities like ours matter, how we come together when it counts." Lucas met the mayor's gaze, recognizing the political calculation behind the words, but also the genuine emotion. "Just glad the boy is safe." "There will be recognition for this," Wilson continued. "The town council will want to honor you and your dogs formally." But halfway back to the command post, Aiden's head began to droop against Lucas's, his small body growing heavier with exhaustion. The day's events, coming after a night alone in the forest, were finally overwhelming the boy's remarkable resilience. "Stay with me, Aiden," Lucas encouraged, reaching up to steady the child. "Tell me about school. What's your favorite subject?" "Art," came the mumbled reply. "And science. We're learning about dinosaurs." "Like Rex?" Lucas prompted, needing to keep the boy conscious and alert. "Rex is a carnivore," Aiden informed him with surprising clarity given his exhausted state. "That means he eats meat." "That's right," Lucas confirmed, deliberately engaging the boy in conversation as they continued their careful progress through the rain-soaked forest. "What other dinosaurs do you know about?" The simple question launched Aiden into a detailed, if somewhat disjointed, explanation of various dinosaur species, their diets, and their habitats. Lucas listened attentively, asking questions when the boy's voice began to fade, using the child's enthusiasm for the subject to keep him awake and distracted from discomfort. Throughout this impromptu paleontology lesson, the German shepherds maintained their vigilant escort, occasionally adjusting their positions to account for terrain changes, but never breaking formation. Their discipline was remarkable, Not once did they chase after forest wildlife or become distracted by the numerous scents and sounds that must have tempted their keen senses. As they approached the final ridge before the command post, Lucas's radio crackled to life. "Reeves, what's your position?" Sheriff Bennett's voice carried a mix of professional concern and personal worry. "Approximately 10 minutes out," Lucas reported, shifting Aiden slightly to maintain balance as they navigated. "A particularly steep section. Child is conscious but fatigued. Dogs are performing admirably. Medical team is standing by," Bennett confirmed. "And Reeves, Mason's mother, is here. Well, just be prepared for an emotional reception." Lucas acknowledged the warning, understanding its implications. In his military career, he'd witnessed many reunions, the joyful chaos when separated families reconnected, the overwhelming relief when the missing were found. Such moments were raw, unfiltered emotion, unpredictable in their expression but always intense. "Aiden," he said, reaching up to gently squeeze the boy's leg, "we're almost there. Your mom is waiting for you." The child stirred from his dinosaur-focused monologue. "Mom's there." "She sure is," Lucas confirmed. "She's been looking for you all night and all day." "Is she mad?" Aiden asked in a small voice that reminded Lucas sharply of just how young and vulnerable the boy truly was. "No, buddy, she's not mad," Lucas assured him with absolute certainty. "She's just happy you're safe." They crested the final ridge, and the command post came into view below them, a collection of vehicles with emergency lights creating pulsing islands of color in the gray downpour. Even from a distance, Lucas could see increased activity as someone spotted their approach and alerted the others. "Almost home," Lucas told Aiden, feeling the boy straighten slightly on his shoulders. As they descended toward the command post, Lucas gave a hand signal to the dogs. "Close formation," he commanded, bringing the German shepherds into a tighter, protective unit around them. This wasn't military protocol or service dog training. It was Lucas's instinctive response to the approaching crowd, wanting to ensure Aiden wasn't overwhelmed in the crucial final moments of their journey. The prospect sent an immediate jolt of anxiety through Lucas. Public ceremonies, speeches, attention. These were precisely the things he had retreated to his isolated cabin to avoid. Before he could formulate a response, a commotion near the medical vehicle drew everyone's attention. Aiden, now wrapped in fresh blankets with an emergency warming pack against his chest, was gesturing emphatically and appearing distressed. His mother and the paramedics seemed to be trying to calm him without success. Lucas moved automatically toward the scene, the German shepherds falling into formation behind him without requiring a command. As they approached, Aiden's agitated voice became clearer. "No! I want them to come too! Lucas and the dogs have to come to the hospital!" Sarah Mason looked up as Lucas approached, her expression apologetic. "The paramedics say he needs to go to Pinehaven Medical for observation. Mild hypothermia, dehydration, the ankle, all minor, but they want him monitored overnight. He's insisting you and the dogs come with us." Lucas understood immediately. The psychological impact of rescue could be as significant as the physical ordeal, particularly for a child. Aiden had formed an intense bond with his rescuers through the shared experience of danger and survival. The abrupt severing of that connection could be traumatic. Kneeling to Aiden's eye level, Lucas spoke gently but directly. "The doctors need to take care of you now, buddy. My dogs and I have to take care of our equipment and get home." "But what if I get scared?" Aiden asked, his lower lip trembling slightly. Lucas considered the boy thoughtfully, then made a decision. "Rex will stay with you," he said, nodding at the stuffed dinosaur still clutched in Aiden's hand. "And maybe one of my team can visit you tomorrow after the doctors say it's okay." "Shadow?" Aiden asked hopefully, looking at the senior dog who had been most prominently involved in their rescue. "If the hospital allows it," Lucas agreed, glancing at Sarah for confirmation. She nodded quickly. "I'll make sure it's approved. After what you've done," her voice broke slightly, "whatever you need ever, it's yours." With this promise securing Aiden's cooperation, the paramedics prepared to transport him to the hospital. As they loaded the stretcher into the ambulance, Aiden waved the dinosaur's arm at Lucas and the dogs, a gesture that somehow contained more genuine gratitude than any formal ceremony could express. After the ambulance departed, the search site began to disperse. Volunteers collected equipment, sheriff's deputies coordinated final documentation, and the various vehicles gradually pulled away, leaving only a churned mud field where the command post had stood. Lucas and his team were among the last to leave. The 5 German shepherds, now considerably drier but still showing signs of the day's exertion, loaded into the truck in their practiced order. As Lucas prepared to drive away, Sheriff Bennett approached for a final word. "That was something special today, Reeves. Not just finding the boy, but how your dogs worked together. The way they helped with the extraction." The sheriff paused, choosing his words carefully. "The county's K9 unit is, well, it's not what it should be. Budget cuts, retirement of our best handler. I'd like to talk to you sometime about consultation, possibilities." Lucas felt an immediate impulse to refuse, to retreat back to his cabin and his controlled environment. But something had shifted during those crucial moments on the ravine edge, when Shadow and Valor had seized his pack straps and prevented a potentially catastrophic fall. A door had opened, however slightly. "Maybe," he allowed. "Not right away." Bennett nodded, understanding the measured response. "When you're ready, the offer stands." The drive back to the cabin was silent, except for the steady rhythm of windshield wipers clearing the persistent rain. Lucas checked his rearview mirror, occasionally confirming the shepherds remained in their assigned positions despite their evident fatigue. Their performance today had exceeded all training expectations, demonstrating not just obedience but initiative and problem-solving in a crisis situation. By the time they arrived home, twilight was settling over the forest. Lucas performed the essential post-operation care for his team: fresh water, high-protein food, brief medical checks for any injuries sustained during the search. Each dog received individual attention and quiet praise before being released to their indoor resting areas. Only when his team was settled did Lucas attend to his own needs. Peeling off the mud-caked, soaked clothing, he stood under a hot shower until the water ran clear and some warmth returned to his core. The physical exertion of the day had been substantial, but it was the emotional terrain he had navigated that left him most exhausted. For the first time in 14 months, he had entered a high-stress crisis situation, faced potential triggers, worked with civilians, been responsible for a life-or-death outcome. All the scenarios his therapist had warned might provoke debilitating anxiety or flashbacks. Yet something unexpected had happened. The training had held. The skills had transferred. The dogs had performed beyond expectation. And most surprisingly, Lucas himself had functioned not as a damaged veteran struggling to cope, but as a capable rescuer whose military experience proved valuable rather than burdensome. As he dressed, in dry clothes and prepared a simple meal, Lucas found his thoughts returning to Aiden Mason. The boy's resilience, his immediate connection with the dogs, the way he had trusted Lucas implicitly during the precarious climb from the ravine. Children possessed an instinctive recognition of authenticity that adults often lost, a capacity to sense genuine intention beneath surface appearances. Aiden had seen Lucas not as a scarred veteran with PTSD, but simply as the man who had come to find him, accompanied by 5 extraordinary dogs. The evening passed quietly. Lucas completed his log entries, detailed records he maintained of each dog's training progress and performance. adding extensive notes about their search behavior, rescue assistance, and team coordination. These observations would inform future training sessions, building on the real-world experience they had gained. Sleep, when it finally came, was deeper and more restful than Lucas had experienced in months. Morning arrived with clearing skies and a sense of calm that seemed to extend beyond the weather. Lucas performed the standard morning routine with his team, noting that despite the previous day's extraordinary exertion, all 5 dogs appeared recovered and alert, ready for whatever challenges the day might bring. After breakfast, Lucas received a text message from Sarah Mason with an update on Aiden's condition. Doctors say he's doing great. Minor sprain, no frostbite, hydration improved. Still talking about the superhero dogs to everyone. Hospital-approved shadow visiting this afternoon if you're willing. Lucas studied the message, considering his response. A hospital visit meant town, people, attention, all things he typically avoided. Yet the thought of disappointing Aiden, after everything the boy had endured, was somehow worse than the prospect of facing public scrutiny. "Shadow and I will be there at 2 p.m., he replied, then added after a moment's reflection, "Glad he's doing well." The morning training session was modified to account for the previous day's extraordinary efforts. Lucas focused on recovery exercises and gentler skills work, observing each dog for any signs of strain or injury that might have been missed in the post-operation assessment. They all performed admirably, though with a certain watchful expectancy that suggested they sensed something different about this day. As Lucas prepared for the hospital visit, selecting Shadow's formal service vest and his own least-worn button-down shirt, his phone rang. The screen displayed Dr. Winters, his VA-assigned therapist, whom he spoke with via video call every 2 weeks. "Captain Reeves," Dr. Winters greeted him when he answered. "I just heard about your involvement in yesterday's rescue. It's all over the local news." Lucas hadn't considered media coverage. The realization that his actions were being publicly reported sent a familiar tightness through his chest. "Just did what needed doing," he responded tersely. "Precisely why." "I'm calling," Dr. Winters continued, her tone professional but warm. "You faced exactly the type of high-stress, public situation we've discussed as potential triggers. I wanted to check in, see how you're processing the experience." Lucas considered the question with the honest self-assessment that had become part of his recovery process. "It was different than I expected," he admitted. "During the operation, training took over. The dogs provided structure. Focus stayed on the mission parameters. And afterward," Dr. Winters prompted, "some decompression required, but the crash was milder than anticipated." Lucas paused, organizing his thoughts. Having the dogs maintain their routines helped. Provided continuity. Dr. Winters made an approving sound. "You've applied the strategies we discussed, used your training as a framework rather than seeing it as a trigger. That's significant progress, Captain." The conversation continued for several minutes, Lucas describing the rescue in his characteristically concise manner, while Dr. Winters occasionally asked clarifying questions. Unlike their regularly scheduled sessions, which often felt like obligations to be endured, this exchange had a different quality. A professional discussing an operation with a respected colleague, rather than a therapist evaluating a patient. "I understand you're planning to visit the child in the hospital today," Dr. Winters said, as their conversation drew to a close. "Affirmative. The boy requested Shadow specifically." "That's another positive step, choosing to enter a public setting, accepting recognition for your actions. Remember what we've discussed about allowing people to express gratitude. It's not just for you, it's important for them as well." Lucas acknowledged this perspective, though it still felt uncomfortable. After ending the call, He completed preparations for the hospital visit, giving Shadow an extra brushing to ensure the shepherd looked his best. The other dogs watched with interest as their team leader received special attention. "You're representing the unit today," Lucas told Shadow seriously as he secured the formal service vest with its official patches and identification. The shepherd responded with focused attention, recognizing the significance of the special equipment. The drive to Pinehaven Medical Center took 23 minutes. As Lucas parked in the visitor section, he noticed several people pointing toward his truck, recognizing either him or Shadow or both. News of yesterday's rescue had clearly spread throughout the small community. Taking a deep breath, Lucas centered himself, using the techniques Dr. Winters had taught him for managing public interactions. "Shadow, heel!" he commanded, and the shepherd moved into perfect position beside him, providing both the comfort of familiar routine and a practical buffer between Lucas and potential crowd interactions. They entered the hospital's main lobby, together, Lucas walking with the straight-backed posture ingrained by military service, Shadow gliding beside him with dignified precision. Conversation paused as people noticed them, then resumed in excited whispers. Lucas kept his focus forward, acknowledging greetings with brief nods but not stopping until he reached the reception desk. "Lucas Reeves and Shadow to see Aiden Mason," he stated simply. The receptionist's face lit with recognition. "Of course. Everyone's been talking about what you did. Aiden's in pediatrics, 3rd floor. I'll call up and let them know you're coming." She reached for the phone, then paused, looking at Shadow with slight hesitation. "The dog has proper certification." Lucas nodded, presenting Shadow's service documentation and the hospital approval Sarah had secured. The paperwork was quickly reviewed and approved, allowing them to proceed to the elevator. As the doors closed behind them, Lucas exhaled slowly, realizing he had been maintaining a state of heightened alert since entering the building. Shadow pressed gently against his leg, the trained response to signs of anxiety in his handler. The contact helped, grounding Lucas in the present moment and the specific mission of visiting Aiden. When they stepped out on the pediatric floor, a nurse was waiting to escort them. "Aiden's been talking about this visit all morning," she informed Lucas with a warm smile. "He's told his story to every staff member who's entered his room, with particular emphasis on the superhero dogs who rescued him." Lucas managed a slight smile in return, finding it easier to respond to comments about his dogs than praise directed at him personally. "Shadow is the team leader. He initiated the scent tracking that located Aiden." The nurse led them to a room decorated with colorful cartoons and space-themed murals. Inside, Aiden sat propped up in bed, his injured ankle elevated on a pillow, the stuffed dinosaur positioned beside him. Sarah Mason occupied a chair near the window, her exhausted but relieved expression brightening when she saw Lucas and Shadow. "Shadow!" Aiden exclaimed, his voice rising with excitement as he attempted to sit up straighter. The movement jostled his injured ankle, causing him to wince, but the flash of discomfort couldn't dim his enthusiasm. Lucas gave a subtle hand command, and Shadow moved forward with measured steps, approaching the bed with gentle awareness of the medical environment. The shepherd stopped at a respectful distance, looking to Lucas for further instruction. "He remembers you," Lucas explained to Aiden, "but he's waiting for permission to come closer." "Can he come up on the bed?" Aiden asked eagerly, then quickly looked at his mother. "Please, Mom, please." Sarah glanced at Lucas uncertainly. "Is that safe? Appropriate?" Lucas appreciated her concern. A hospital bed with a recovering child was not standard operational territory for a service dog, even one as well trained as Shadow. "He's trained to be careful around medical equipment," Lucas explained, "but if you'd prefer, he can just stand beside the bed where Aiden can reach him." Before Sarah could respond, a doctor entered the room, The middle-aged woman paused, taking in the scene with professional assessment. "You must be Mr. Reeves," she said, extending her hand. "And this is the famous Shadow. I'm Dr. Patel, Aiden's attending physician." Lucas shook her hand, noting her direct gaze and confident demeanor. "Ma'am, just checking in on Aiden as promised." Dr. Patel smiled, moving to check the monitors beside Aiden's bed. "Our young patient here has been giving us hourly updates on when you'd arrive. As for the bed question I overheard, if the dog is as well trained as Aiden claims, a brief supervised visit on the bed should be fine. It would actually be consistent with our approach to animal-assisted therapy." With medical approval granted, Lucas gave another hand signal. Shadow approached the bed's edge, waiting until Lucas patted the mattress before carefully jumping up. The shepherd's movements were deliberate and gentle, his paws finding stable purchase on the blanket well away from Aiden's injured ankle. The boy's face glowed with delight as Shadow settled into a sphinx position beside him. With slightly trembling fingers, Aiden reached out to stroke the dog's fur. "You saved me," he told Shadow seriously. "You and the other dogs. You're the bravest dogs in the whole world." Shadow maintained perfect composure, though his eyes remained alert, regularly checking Lucas for guidance. This was outside their normal training scenarios, but the shepherd's adaptability was evident in his calm acceptance of the unusual setting. Dr. Patel observed the interaction with professional interest. "The therapeutic benefits are already apparent," she noted to Sarah and Lucas. "Heart rate stabilizing, anxiety markers decreasing. This is precisely why animal therapy can be so valuable in pediatric recovery." Sarah smiled through tears that had suddenly appeared. "After everything that happened, I never expected this outcome, that he'd be sitting here smiling, petting a dog that helped save his life." While Aiden chattered happily to Shadow about his hospital experience and the cool X-ray machine that had examined his ankle, Lucas and Sarah stepped slightly away from the bed for a quieter conversation. "The sheriff told me how difficult it was," Sarah said in a low voice. "The terrain, the ravine, that he wouldn't have made it without you and your dogs. I don't even know how to begin thanking you." Lucas shifted uncomfortably under the weight of her gratitude. "The dogs did what they're trained to do. I just went along." Sarah studied him with perceptive eyes. "My brother was like that when he came back from Iraq. Couldn't accept thanks, couldn't take credit, always deflected to his unit, his training." Comparison caught Lucas off guard. He'd become accustomed to civilians treating his veteran status with either awkward reverence or uncomfortable avoidance. Sarah's direct acknowledgement, coupled with genuine understanding, was unexpected. "Your brother," Lucas said, an implied question in the words. "He struggled for years after coming home," Sarah admitted, "but he's doing better now. Works with the VA in Capital City, helping other vets navigate the system." She paused, weighing her next words. He found his purpose again, something that made use of what he'd been through, rather than asking him to pretend it never happened. Before Lucas could respond to this insight, Aiden called from the bed. "Mom, Lucas, look, Shadow knows tricks." They turned to find the shepherd responding to Aiden's amateur hand signals with patient indulgence. The boy had apparently been experimenting with commands, and Shadow was politely acknowledging each attempt without actually performing any actions that might disturb the medical setting. "He's waiting for proper commands," Lucas explained, moving back to the bedside. "Want to see what he can really do?" Aiden nodded enthusiastically, and for the next 15 minutes, Lucas demonstrated a series of Shadow's service dog skills. Retrieval, alert responses, and pressure techniques, modified for the hospital room's confined space. Each successful execution elicited delighted applause from Aiden and impressed comments from Dr. Patel, who had remained to observe. "The level of training is extraordinary," the doctor remarked, "and the bond between handler and dog is evident in every interaction. Shadow was my first, Lucas found himself explaining, surprised by his own willingness to share. "When I came back from my last deployment, he helped me readjust to civilian life." Dr. Patel nodded with professional understanding. Service animals can provide unique support for veterans experiencing post-traumatic stress or reintegration challenges. The unconditional acceptance, the structured responsibility of care, the tactile comfort, all evidence-based therapeutic elements. There was something in her matter-of-fact clinical assessment that Lucas found oddly comforting. No pity, no awkward gratitude for his service, just acknowledgement of established therapeutic mechanisms. "That's why I started training them," Lucas said, watching as Shadow demonstrated a gentle headrest on Aiden's lap, "to help other vets find what I found." The visit continued with Aiden showing Shadow the drawings other children from his school had sent, colorful crayon illustrations of the rescue as imagined by 6- and 7-year-olds, featuring heroic dogs that more closely resembled wolves or bears than German shepherds, and a stick figure Aiden often depicted with a triumphant smile rather than the frightened hypothermic child he had actually been. "My teacher brought these," Aiden explained proudly. "The whole class made them. They think I'm brave now." "You are brave," Lucas confirmed seriously. "Not many kids would have survived a night alone in that forest." As the visit approached the 30-minute mark that had been approved by hospital staff, Lucas prepared Shadow for departure. The shepherd responded immediately to the subtle commands, gently disengaging from Aiden's attentions and moving to a heel position beside Lucas. "Do you have to go?" Aiden asked, disappointment evident in his voice. "Hospital rules," Lucas explained. "But Dr. Patel says you'll probably be discharged tomorrow. Maybe you and your mom can visit us when you're feeling better." The suggestion was spontaneous, surprising Lucas even as he made it. His cabin and training facility had been his private domain, a controlled environment carefully maintained to minimize triggers and unexpected variables. Inviting visitors, especially a child, represented a significant deviation from his established boundaries. Yet something about Aiden's connection with Shadow and the boy's remarkable resilience during the rescue had created an exception to Lucas's usual caution. The child had earned a unique position through shared experience, the kind of bond that military personnel understood implicitly. Sarah looked equally surprised by the invitation. "We wouldn't want to impose—" "It's not an imposition," Lucas interrupted, more decisively than he typically spoke to civilians. "Aiden should see the whole team. They all participated in finding him." The boy's face lit up. "All 5 dogs? At your house? Can I, Mom? Please?" Dr. Patel, who had been updating Aiden's chart, looked up with an approving nod. "I think that would be excellent therapy, actually. Revisiting traumatic experiences in a controlled, positive context can help process and integrate them properly. We recommend it for many pediatric trauma patients." With medical endorsement supporting Aiden's enthusiasm, Sarah relented. "If you're sure it's no trouble," she told Lucas, "we'd love to visit." Arrangements were made for the following weekend, allowing Aiden time to recover and Lucas time to prepare himself and his facility for visitors. As they said their goodbyes, Aiden held out his stuffed dinosaur toward Shadow. "Rex wants to say goodbye too," the boy explained seriously. Shadow, displaying the intuitive awareness that made him exceptional even among service dogs, gently touched his nose to the dinosaur's snout, causing Aiden to giggle with delight. "He likes Rex," the boy declared triumphantly. "Smart dog," Lucas commented. "Rex helped keep you brave in the forest. Shadow respects that." As Lucas and Shadow made their way back through the hospital, the atmosphere felt different than during their arrival. The stares and whispers remained, but Lucas found them less intrusive, his focus anchored by the successful completion of the visit and Shadow's steadying presence beside him. In the hospital lobby, an unexpected encounter awaited. An older man in a motorized wheelchair positioned himself directly in their path, his military bearing evident despite his seated position. The Vietnam-era veteran's cap he wore confirmed Lucas's immediate assessment. "Captain Reeves," the man said, his voice carrying the gravelled quality of long-term smokers. "Master Sergeant Daniel Wilson, retired. United States Army, 173rd Airborne Brigade." Lucas straightened automatically, military courtesy deeply ingrained. "Sergeant Wilson, A for key." Older veteran's eyes moved to Shadow, then back to Lucas. "Heard what you and your dogs did yesterday. Wanted to shake your hand, if that's acceptable." Something in the formal phrasing, the careful request for permission rather than presumption of welcome, resonated with Lucas. This wasn't the effusive gratitude of civilians that often felt invasive and uncomfortable, but the measured recognition of one soldier to another. Lucas extended his hand, accepting the firm handshake the older man offered. "The dogs did the hard work." Wilson nodded, understanding the deflection for what it was. "Always said the same about my men when I got commended. Truth is, it takes both, good soldiers and good leadership." He glanced at Shadow again, approval evident in his expression. "You're doing good work with those dogs. Word is, you train them for vets with issues. Service dogs for veterans with PTSD and mobility limitations." Lucas confirmed, finding it easier to discuss the program than to accept personal praise. "My grandson came back from Afghanistan 3 years ago," Wilson continued. "Not the same. Boy who left, barely leaves his apartment now, jumps at shadows." The old soldier's face showed the complex mixture of pride, worry, and helplessness that Lucas had seen in many military families. "Been trying to convince him to look into one of these service dog programs." Lucas recognized the unstated request beneath the information. Without conscious decision, he reached into his wallet and extracted one of the plain business cards he rarely distributed. "Have him call if he's interested. No pressure, no obligations, just information." Wilson accepted the card with dignity, tucking it carefully into his shirt pocket. "Appreciate it, Captain." He offered a crisp salute, not required in civilian settings between veterans of different eras, but clearly meaningful to the older man. Lucas returned the salute with equal precision, then continued toward the exit, Shadow maintaining perfect position beside him. The drive back to the cabin was filled with quiet reflection. The hospital visit had gone better than anticipated. The interaction with Sergeant Wilson had been unexpected, but not unwelcome. Something was shifting in Lucas's carefully constructed isolation, doors opening that had been firmly closed since his medical discharge. As they turned onto the gravel road leading to his property, Lucas glanced at Shadow in the rearview mirror. "Performed admirably today, soldier," he told the shepherd, who responded with alert attention despite the informal setting. "Above and beyond expected parameters." At home, Lucas released Shadow from service duty, removing the formal vest and allowing the dog to join his teammates in the main yard. The other shepherds greeted their returning leader with obvious enthusiasm, sniffing and circling in their typical canine communication rituals. Lucas watched them interact, seeing the subtle dynamics of his carefully constructed pack. Shadow maintained his natural leadership position, but there was unmistakable respect in how the others deferred to him, not from fear or dominance, but from genuine recognition of his capabilities and experience. Much like a well-functioning military unit, Lucas reflected, each member with specific skills and attributes working together toward common objectives, supporting one another through challenges. The comparison felt right in ways he hadn't fully articulated before, even to himself. The remainder of the afternoon was dedicated to routine training exercises with all 5 dogs, focusing particularly on Ranger's ongoing development as the youngest team member. The structured activity helped Lucas process the day's social interactions, providing familiar patterns that balanced the unusual experiences at the hospital. That evening, as Lucas prepared dinner, his phone chimed with an incoming email. The yes sender, Pinehaven Community Herald, triggered immediate wariness. He had successfully avoided reporters during and after the rescue, but it appeared his reprieve from media attention was ending. Opening the message with reluctance, he found a politely worded request from the local newspaper's editor. Captain Reeves, our community has been deeply moved by your heroic rescue of Aidan Mason. As Pinehaven's local paper, we would like to share this story with our readers. While we respect your privacy, we believe your work training service dogs for veterans deserves recognition and could inspire others who might benefit from such programs. Would you consider allowing a brief interview and perhaps a photograph of your dogs? We would conduct this at your convenience and location of choice, with any boundaries you wish to establish. Respectfully, Eleanor Simmons, editor, Pinehaven Community Herald. Lucas's instinct was immediate rejection. Public attention, interviews, photographs, all represented potential complications to his carefully managed recovery environment. Yet Dr. Winter's words from their morning conversation returned to him. Allowing people to express gratitude wasn't just for him. It was important for them as well, and there was something else, something that hadn't been part of his considerations before yesterday's rescue, the possibility that public awareness of his service dog program might reach veterans in need, like Sergeant Wilson's grandson. Lucas set the phone aside without responding, needing time to consider the request from all angles. His training, both military and therapeutic, had emphasized thoughtful decision-making rather than reactive responses. After dinner and the dog's evening care routine, Lucas found himself drawn to the small office adjacent to the main living area. The room contained his service records, training manuals, and a locked cabinet housing his military decorations. Items he rarely revisited, but had never discarded. Opening the cabinet, he removed a wooden box containing his medals and commendations. The bronze star gleamed dully in the office's low light, its weight in his palm substantial despite its small size. The accompanying citation described actions during an ambush outside Kandahar, leadership under fire, evacuation of wounded men, strategic decisions that saved lives. Lucas had never felt comfortable with the recognition, had accepted the medal out of respect for military tradition rather than personal pride. The memories associated with that day were not of heroism, but of fear, managed through training, of desperate focus on keeping his men alive, of the crushing responsibility of command decisions made in seconds that would echo through lifetimes. Yet, something about yesterday's rescue had recontextualized those experiences. The skills that had kept him and his men alive in combat had directly contributed to finding and saving Aidan. The leadership capabilities that had guided his unit through enemy territory had coordinated 5 dogs in a complex search operation. The tactical thinking developed in warfare had navigated a treacherous ravine extraction in deteriorating weather conditions. For the first time since his medical discharge, Lucas allowed himself to consider that his military experience might be an asset rather than merely a source of trauma to be managed. The perspective shift was subtle but profound, not denying or minimizing the psychological cost of combat, but recognizing that the same experiences had forged capabilities that had tangible value in civilian life. Replacing the medal box, Lucas returned to the living room, where the 5 shepherds had settled into their evening positions. Ranger and Liberty dozed near the wood stove, while Scout maintained his customary watchful position near the front window. Valor had claimed the rug beside Lucas's favorite chair, and Shadow, as always, positioned himself where he could maintain visual contact with Lucas while still overseeing the rest of the pack. Looking at them, Lucas made his decision about the newspaper interview. He would accept with clear boundaries and conditions, but he would accept, not for personal recognition, but because other veterans might see themselves in his story. Morning. Light filtered through the pine trees surrounding Lucas's cabin, casting dappled patterns across the training yard. 3 days had passed since the rescue, and the property was undergoing subtle but significant transformations in preparation for Aidan and Sarah's upcoming visit. Lucas had spent the early hours raking the main pathways, clearing low-hanging branches and ensuring the facility presented its best face, not for inspection, but for sharing. The scheduled interview with Eleanor Simmons from the Pinehaven Community Herald was set for noon. Lucas checked his watch, 0947 hours, giving him time for a final training session with the dogs before the reporter's arrival. The routine would settle his nerves and center him before the unfamiliar experience of discussing his program with a journalist. Team formation, Lucas called from the back porch. The 5 German shepherds emerged from various resting spots around the yard, assembling in their standard arrangement with practiced efficiency. Shadow took point position, with Valor and Liberty flanking, while Scout and Ranger formed the rear guard. Their alert postures and focused gazes demonstrated the discipline that had made them so effective during the search for Aidan. Lucas led them through a series of increasingly complex commands, watching with quiet pride as each dog performed the behaviors that would eventually help veterans navigate the challenges of civilian life with PTSD or physical disabilities. Shadow demonstrated pressure therapy techniques, lying across Lucas's legs with calibrated weight when he simulated anxiety symptoms. Valor showcased his retrieval skills, fetching specific items from a distance with remarkable precision. Liberty performed her specialty, creating a protective buffer in simulated crowd scenarios, positioning herself to block approaches from strangers. Scout, whose tracking abilities had been instrumental in finding Aidan, demonstrated alertness to environmental changes, while young Ranger showed his progress in learning to recognize and respond to emotional distress cues. The synchronized performance of the canine team reflected hundreds of hours of careful training, but also something less tangible, a deep connection between handler and dogs that transcended mere obedience. As they completed the session, Lucas heard the sound of tires on gravel approaching his property. The dogs reacted simultaneously, ears forward, bodies alert but not alarmed. Their training included appropriate responses to visitors, distinguishing between welcome arrivals and potential threats. "At ease," Lucas commanded, and the shepherds relaxed their formal positions while maintaining attentive awareness. A sensible sedan pulled into the clearing before the cabin, its forest green color blending with the surrounding pines. A woman in her early 50s emerged, carrying a professional camera and a small notebook. Her practical clothing, hiking boots, khaki pants, and a weather-resistant jacket, suggested familiarity with the rural environment. "Captain Reeves," she called, remaining beside her vehicle until invited further. The respectful boundary observation didn't go unnoticed by Lucas. "Miss Simmons," he acknowledged, moving forward to meet her while signaling the dogs to remain in position. "Welcome to Woodland Guardian Service, dogs." Eleanor Simmons extended her hand with a direct, professional manner that Lucas appreciated. "Thank you for agreeing to this interview. I understand your preference for privacy, and I'm grateful for the exception." Lucas accepted the handshake with a brief nod. "The program deserves recognition more than I do. The dog's work should be known to veterans who might benefit." Eleanor's gaze moved past him to the 5 shepherds maintaining their disciplined formation despite the visitors' arrival. "They're magnificent," she said with genuine appreciation. "Are these the same 5 that participated in the rescue?" "Affirmative," Lucas confirmed. Shadow, Valor, Liberty, Scout, and Ranger. Each specializes in different service dog functions, though they're cross-trained in multiple disciplines, may I? Eleanor gestured with her camera. Lucas nodded his permission, and the reporter began taking photographs of the dogs from a respectful distance. Her movements were careful and deliberate, clearly mindful of not disturbing the animal's training. Environment, I understand you only want photos of the dogs, not yourself, she commented while adjusting her lens. Correct. This isn't about me. It's about the program and what service dogs can do for veterans. Eleanor lowered her camera, studying Lucas with perceptive eyes. That distinction matters to you. It wasn't a question, but Lucas responded anyway. The attention should go where it's most useful. Dogs don't get distracted by public recognition. Veterans who need service animals don't care about my face, just whether the program can help them. This pragmatic perspective seemed to resonate with Eleanor, who nodded thoughtfully before returning to her photography. After capturing several angles of the dogs, both in formation and performing basic commands that Lucas demonstrated, she closed her camera case. Could we talk more about the program itself, perhaps while the dogs continue their training? I've found subjects often speak more naturally when engaged in familiar activities. The suggestion revealed an understanding of interview dynamics that Lucas hadn't expected from a small-town newspaper editor. Acceptable approach, he agreed, moving back toward the training area and signaling the dogs to follow. For the next hour, as Lucas put the shepherds through their pacing and training exercises, he found himself explaining the fundamentals of service dog training with increasing fluency. Eleanor's questions were knowledgeable and respectful, focused on the technical aspects of the program rather than probing into Lucas's personal history or military service. How long does it typically take to train a service dog for PTSD support? She asked, watching as Shadow demonstrated a room-clearing behavior, methodically checking the perimeter of the training area before returning to Lucas's side. Minimum 18 months, Lucas explained, rewarding Shadow with a brief moment of praise. Basic obedience and general service dog training take the first 8 to 10 months. Specialization for PTSD response adds another 6 to 8, depending on the dog's aptitude and the specific needs of the eventual handler. And the success rate? Approximately 60% complete the full program successfully. Not every dog has the temperament or cognitive capacity for the work, regardless of breed or initial assessment. We don't force square pegs into round holes. Better to recognize early when a dog isn't suited for service work. Eleanor made notes, her writing as efficient as her questions. What happens to the dogs that don't complete the program? They're placed in appropriate homes as pets, usually with veterans who don't require full-service dog capabilities but benefit from the companionship of a well-trained animal. Lucas demonstrated a retrieval exercise with Liberty, sending her to collect a specific item from several options positioned across the yard. And how many dogs have you successfully placed with veterans so far? 17 in 4 years. 7 specifically trained for PTSD support. 5 for mobility assistance, 3 for medical alert functions, and 2 for combinations of needs. The precision of his record-keeping was evident in the immediate availability of these statistics. Last seen at approximately 2200 hours. Camp is adjacent to Bedford National Forest, several thousand acres of mixed woodland. Temperature dropped to 47 overnight. Boy's name is Michael Chen, Chinese-American, about 5'2", 90 pounds. Brown hair, was wearing grey sweatpants and a blue long-sleeve shirt with a robot design. Lucas processed this information while packing his rucksack with essential gear, first aid supplies, emergency blankets, energy bars, water, and a satellite phone for areas with poor cell reception. He added the stuffed dinosaur that had provided comfort to Aiden, thinking it might serve a similar purpose for another frightened child. "Any items with the boys' scent?" he asked, securing the pack and checking each dog's vest for proper fit. "Camp staff set aside his pillow and a weighted blanket he uses. They'll have them at the command post." Bennett watched Lucas's methodical preparations with approval. "How soon can you deploy?" 20 minutes, Lucas replied, already moving toward his truck to prepare the specialized compartment for the dogs. "Need to secure the property and load the team." As Bennett departed to coordinate with Mercer County authorities, Lucas completed his preparations with practiced efficiency. Each action was purposeful, each decision guided by both his military experience and the recent success with Aiden's rescue. The dogs responded to his focused energy with corresponding discipline, loading into the truck in their assigned positions without hesitation. Before departing, Lucas paused to send 2 text messages. The first went to Dr. Winters. "Deploying. With dogs for second SAR operation. Voluntary mission this time. Applying recommended strategies." His therapist had emphasized the importance of maintaining communication during potential trigger situations, and Lucas recognized the value of this protocol. The second message went to Sarah Mason. "Need to reschedule weekend visit. Called to assist with search for missing child. Will contact when returned." He had committed to hosting Aiden and Sarah, and while this emergency took precedence, Lucas found himself unwilling to simply cancel without explanation. The impulse to maintain this social connection, however tenuous, represented a subtle but significant shift in his usual patterns. As Lucas drove toward the Mercer County line, following the coordinates Bennett had provided, he found himself in a markedly different psychological state than during Aiden's rescue. The panicked adrenaline and triggered anxiety had been replaced by something closer to purposeful focus, the mental clarity he had once experienced during well-planned military operations. Shadow sat in the front passenger seat, a placement that allowed the senior dog to maintain visual contact with both Lucas and the rest of the team in the extended cab. The shepherd's steady presence provided a grounding influence, a tangible reminder of the partnership that had evolved from necessity to choice over their years together. "Different scenario this time," Lucas told Shadow, finding comfort in articulating his thoughts to the attentive dog. Autistic child, potentially non-responsive to verbal calls, might need modified search patterns, specialized approach methods. Shadow's ears twitched forward at the sound of Lucas's voice, his intelligent eyes fixed on his handler with unwavering attention. This silent communication had been their foundation from the beginning, Shadow responding not just to commands, but to Lucas's emotional states, providing support tailored to specific needs rather than generic comfort. The rain began as they crossed into Mercer County, light but steady droplets that would eventually become the forecasted downpour. "Lucas, check the time, 14:23 hours. They had approximately 90 minutes before conditions would deteriorate significantly, complicating both the search and the missing boys' survival prospects. The command post came into view at the edge of a clearing, a collection of vehicles, emergency personnel, and harried-looking camp staff. A temporary shelter had been erected to provide planning space protected from the increasing rainfall. As Lucas parked and prepared to unload his team, he noted the distinct difference in atmosphere from Aiden's rescue. The earlier operation had carried the focused urgency of a community unified by purpose. This scene held more tension, with visible jurisdictional boundaries and the strained coordination typical of agencies unaccustomed to working together. Lucas recognized the pattern from countless military operations involving multiple units or coalition forces. Establishing clear command structures and communication protocols would be essential for effective integration of his dogs into the existing search efforts. As he opened the truck door, the 5 German shepherds remained in their assigned positions, awaiting formal release commands rather than rushing to exit. This disciplined behavior immediately drew attention from the gathered searchers, several of whom paused their activities to observe. Captain Reeves. A uniformed officer approached, extending his hand. Lieutenant Diaz, Mercer County Sheriff's Department. Sheriff Bennett called ahead about you and your dogs. Said you performed a miracle locating the Mason boy a few days ago. Lucas shook the lieutenant's hand, noting the fatigue already evident in the officer's posture. No miracles, just trained dogs and favorable conditions. What's your current operational status? Lieutenant Diaz gestured toward the command tent. Better if I show you the search grid. We've got some complications. With a quick command, Lucas released the German shepherds from their waiting positions. They exited the vehicle in precise order and formed up behind him, drawing murmurs of appreciation from nearby searchers. The disciplined display contrasted sharply with the chaotic energy pervading the command post. Inside the tent, a large topographical map had been secured to a folding table, colored pins marking areas already searched. A harried-looking woman, in a camp staff uniform, was explaining something to 2 Forest Service rangers, while a middle-aged Asian-American couple sat nearby, their expressions reflecting the unique strain of parents with a missing child. Michael's parents, Dr. and Mrs. Chen, Lieutenant Diaz explained quietly as they entered. They drove up from the city as soon as the camp called them last night. Lucas nodded, understanding the significance of this information. Parents' presence always complicated search operations. Their emotional involvement could provide crucial information about the child's tendencies, but their understandable anxiety also created additional pressure on searchers. The parents glanced up as Lucas and his canine team entered, their expressions shifting from despair to cautious hope at the sight of the 5 shepherds. Dr. Chen rose immediately, approaching with the focused intensity of a man clinging to any possibility. "You're the handler with the search dogs?" he asked, his voice clinical, but with an undercurrent of barely restrained emotion. "From Pinehaven." Lucas confirmed this with a brief nod. "Captain Lucas Reeves. These are my service dogs, cross-trained in tracking." Dr. Chen studied the German. Shepherds with the evaluative gaze of someone with scientific training. "They found another missing child recently, in difficult terrain." "Yes, sir, 3 days ago, 6-year-old boy in Pinehaven National Forest." Lucas kept his responses concise, recognizing both the father's need for information and the importance of not overselling capabilities. "Michael's been missing for 14 hours, Dr. Chen continued, his voice catching slightly. "He's severely autistic, nonverbal. He won't respond to searchers calling his name. Won't seek help even if he's hurt or frightened." Mrs. Chen joined her husband, placing a supportive hand on his arm. "He has specific comfort items," she added. "His weighted blanket, a particular stuffed penguin. He gets extremely distressed without them, especially in unfamiliar environments." Lucas absorbed this information, mentally adjusting search parameters. "Does Michael have any particular interests or attractions that might guide his movement in the forest? Water features, specific types of terrain, animals?" The parents exchanged a quick glance that communicated long-standing partnership. "He's fascinated by circular patterns in nature," Mrs. Chen explained. "Tree rings, ripples in water, spiral formations. He'll stop and stare at them for extended periods. And he seeks enclosed spaces when overstimulated," Dr. Chen added. "Under beds, inside closets, small spaces where he feels contained and secure." These details were precisely the kind of specific information that could narrow search parameters. Lucas turned to Lieutenant Diaz, who had been observing the exchange with obvious relief at having someone else field the parents' concerns. "I need to familiarize my dogs with Michael's scent and get a better understanding of the terrain before deploying. Has a behavioral profile been established to guide the search pattern? Diaz led Lucas to the map table, where he outlined the current situation. The camp occupied approximately 20 acres along the eastern edge of Bedford National Forest. Michael had been noticed missing during the 10 p.m. bed check. His cabin mates reported he'd become agitated during an evening thunderstorm, but staff had believed he'd calmed down before lights out. We've completed a thorough search of the camp itself and the immediate perimeter, Diaz explained, indicating searched areas with red pins. Standard grid pattern extending half a mile in all directions from the main camp buildings. Nothing. A Forest Service ranger joined them, introducing herself as Ranger Wilcox. We've had teams on the main trails since first light, she added, tracing the paths on the map. Bedford has over 40 miles of marked trails, plus hundreds of acres of unmarked wilderness. The terrain changes significantly on the western edge, becomes more ravine-cut with several water features. Lucas studied the search patterns already employed, noting both their thoroughness and their limitations. Standard grid searches worked well for traditional lost person scenarios, but were less effective for individuals with behavioral differences like Michael's. "May I see the items with Michael's scent?" he requested. A camp counselor brought forward a blue weighted blanket and a small backpack. "These are from his cabin. The blanket was on his bed, and the backpack contains clothes he wore yesterday." Lucas knelt beside Shadow, presenting the items for careful scenting. One by one, each shepherd was allowed to process Michael's unique olfactory signature. Lucas paid particular attention to their responses, noting the alertness in their posture that indicated successful scent recognition. "I'd like to begin at the last confirmed location," Lucas told Diaz. "Where was Michael definitively seen before?" "His disappearance." "The Nature Center," the counselor interjected, pointing to a building near the camp's edge. "He was there for evening activities until the thunderstorm started around 8:30. That's when he became agitated." With this information established, Lucas outlined his proposed approach to Lieutenant Diaz and the Forest Service representatives. "My team will use a modified search pattern based on Michael's specific behavioral profile. Standard grid searches. Assume rational movement towards safety or landmarks. We need to adjust for potential hiding behavior and attraction to specific natural features." Diaz looked skeptical. "You can train dogs to look for different patterns based on behavioral profiles?" "Not exactly," Lucas explained, "but I can deploy them with modified parameters while interpreting their alerts through the lens of the child's likely behaviors." He turned to the parents. "Dr. and Mrs. Chen, would you be willing to accompany us to the Nature Center? Your familiarity with Michael's patterns might help identify potential triggers for his movement." The parents agreed immediately, gathering rain jackets as the group prepared to move toward the Nature Center. As they walked, Lucas maintained awareness of the increasing rainfall and darkening sky. The weather window was closing faster than anticipated, adding urgency to an already time-sensitive operation. The Nature Center was a rustic building constructed of local timber, its large windows designed to maximize views of the surrounding forest. Inside, educational displays about local wildlife and ecosystems lined the walls. A circular arrangement of logs created a meeting area where evening programs were conducted. "Michael was sitting here," Mrs. Chen said, indicating a specific log. "In the circle, the counselor was discussing owl habitats when the thunder started." Lucas directed Shadow to the location, giving him the command to establish a scent baseline. The experienced shepherd sniffed methodically around the log before looking up at Lucas with alert attention. "How did Michael react to the thunder?" Lucas asked, watching Shadow's body language carefully. "He covered his ears, began rocking," the camp counselor recalled. "Standard procedure is to offer noise-canceling headphones and access to comfort items, but he refused the headphones and became increasingly agitated. Another thunderclap hit, much louder, and he ran toward the back of the building. Lucas followed this trajectory, the dogs moving with him in practiced formation. The back of the nature center featured a door leading to a small deck overlooking a wooded ravine. Large windows offered panoramic views of the forest beyond. Was this door secured? Lucas asked, examining the heavy wooden exit. The counselor looked uncertain. It should have been locked after sunset, but with the storm and the chaos of getting 20 kids back to cabins, she left the implication hanging. Lucas opened the door, allowing Shadow to take the lead position on the deck. The rain had intensified, the wooden planks already slick with moisture. Beyond the deck, a narrow trail descended into the ravine, partially obscured by underbrush and increasingly difficult to discern in the fading light. Shadow moved purposefully to the deck's edge, nose working the air currents before focusing on the trail. His ears pricked forward, a subtle but clear indication that had proven reliable during Aiden's search. "He's got something," Lucas informed the group. "Possible exit point from the deck to the ravine trail." Dr. Chen stepped forward, studying the ravine with newfound intensity. "There's a stream at the bottom," he noted. "Michael is drawn to water, especially circular patterns like eddies or ripples." This information aligned with Shadow's indication. Lucas made a quick operational decision. "We'll deploy in modified search formation. Shadow and Scout will work the ravine trail with me. Lieutenant Diaz, can you coordinate 2 of your teams to parallel our route along the ridge lines on either side?" Diaz nodded, already reaching for his radio to implement the suggestion. "The remaining dogs can establish a perimeter search expanding from this location," Lucas continued, turning to one of the forest rangers. "Ranger Wilcox, would you be willing to coordinate with Valor, Liberty, and Ranger? They are trained to maintain search patterns and will alert to human scent, but they'll need someone with forest knowledge to manage terrain challenges." The ranger agreed readily, impressed by the structured approach. Lucas provided her with basic commands for the 3 shepherds, who responded to her authority with the same discipline they showed toward him, a testament to their training, to work with multiple handlers in service settings. As the search teams organized according to Lucas's direction, he knelt briefly beside Shadow, checking the shepherd's tactical vest to ensure all compartments were secured. "Find Michael," he instructed quietly, presenting the scented blanket once more. "Find the boy." Shadow's focused attention communicated understanding more clearly than words could have. Lucas straightened, adjusting his own equipment before addressing Dr. Chen, who had been watching the interaction with keen interest. "I'd like you to accompany us on the ravine trail," Lucas told him. "Your knowledge of Michael's behaviors will help interpret what we find. Mrs. Chen should remain at command. Post in case Michael returns to a familiar location." Dr. Chen nodded, his medical training evidently helping him maintain composure despite the obvious emotional strain. "I'll follow your lead." The descent into the ravine was treacherous, the trail deteriorating quickly under the increasingly heavy rainfall. Shadow moved with confident precision, pausing occasionally to check scent particles before continuing forward. Scout maintained a position slightly behind and to the left, providing secondary confirmation of Shadow's tracking while monitoring the wider environment. Lucas maintained awareness of Dr. Chen, who navigated the difficult terrain with determined focus. The father's desperate concern was evident in every movement, but he followed instructions without question, understanding the need for disciplined search protocols. At the ravine bottom, a stream that would normally be a gentle trickle had swollen to a fast-moving current. Shadow paused at the water's edge, working the air currents methodically before moving upstream with purpose. "He's following a scent trail," Lucas explained to Dr. Chen. "The water complicates tracking, but Shadow's compensating by using air currents above the stream." They followed the stream for approximately half a mile, the ravine walls growing steeper. On either side, communication with the flanking teams became intermittent as the topography interfered with radio signals. Lucas maintained contact through abbreviated status reports whenever connection was established, tracking their position on his GPS unit. Nearly 40 minutes into the search, Shadow's behavior changed subtly, his movements becoming more focused, his attention shifting from general tracking to specific target acquisition. Lucas recognized the pattern from previous training scenarios. "He's narrowing in on something," he informed Dr. Chen, whose expression tightened with hope and fear in equal measure. Shadow paused near a section of the stream where the water flowed around a large fallen tree, creating swirling patterns in the current. The shepherd looked back at Lucas, then forward again, the trained indication that he had found something significant but required guidance on next steps. Lucas moved forward carefully, scanning the area with tactical precision. The fallen tree created a natural bridge across the stream, its massive root system exposed where it had been torn from the ground. Within this tangled network of roots and soil, Lucas spotted what Shadow had detected, a small opening, just large enough for a child to crawl into. "Michael seeks enclosed spaces when overwhelmed," Dr. Chen whispered, his voice tight with recognition. "The root cavity would feel secure, contained." Lucas nodded, assessing the situation quickly. The opening was approximately 3 feet off, the ground partially obscured by the root structure and accumulating debris from the rising stream. A child seeking shelter could have crawled inside, but the increasing water level now threatened to flood the cavity. "Michael!" Lucas called, keeping his voice calm but projected. "Michael Chen?" No response came from the opening, expected given the boy's nonverbal status. Lucas turned to Shadow, giving him a specific command developed for confined space. "Investigations. Check gentle." Shadow approached the opening, sniffing intently before turning to Lucas with an alert posture, confirmation that human scent was present and recent. "He's indicating someone's there," Lucas told Dr. Chen, whose composure finally broke. "Michael!" the father called, moving toward the opening with desperate urgency. "Michael, it's Dad!" Lucas gently restrained him. "Let me check first. The space might be unstable and sudden." The clouds parted as Lucas and the extraction team emerged from the ravine, carrying Michael to safety. Shadow maintained his position at the boy's side, the shepherd's steady presence continuing to provide the calming pressure that kept Michael regulated through the challenging journey. At the command post, the reunion between Michael and his mother was powerfully emotional, though uniquely expressed. Rather than the embraces typical of such moments, Mrs. Chen carefully approached her son, using the counting routine and gentle touch that respected his sensory needs. Michael's recognition of his mother was evident in his slight lean toward her, a gesture Dr. Chen explained was his son's equivalent of a passionate hug. "I don't know how to thank you," Mrs. Chen told Lucas, her voice steady, but her eyes communicating the depth of her gratitude. The other search teams were looking. "For a typical lost child, you understood Michael needed to be found differently." Lucas redirected the praise to his canine team. "The dogs did the tracking. I just interpreted." "But that's precisely it," Dr. Chen interjected, his scientific precision returning now that his son was safe. "You interpreted through the lens of understanding neurodiversity rather than expecting neurotypical behavior patterns. That's why you succeeded where standard protocols failed." As the medical team prepared to transport Michael to the hospital for evaluation, the boy became visibly agitated at being separated from Shadow. The shepherd, sensing the distress, looked to Lucas for direction. Would it help if Shadow accompanied him to the hospital? Lucas offered, surprising himself with the suggestion. 3 days earlier, he would never have volunteered his primary service dog for such an extended public duty. The transformation wasn't lost on Sheriff Bennett, who had arrived during the extraction. "Twice in 1 week, Reeves," he commented quietly. "Seems like you and your team have found a new mission." Later that evening, as Lucas finally returned home with his tired but satisfied dogs, he found a message waiting. Eleanor Simmons had filed her story about the service dog program, but with an unexpected addendum about the second rescue. The online version had already generated dozens of comments, many from veterans inquiring about the program, others from parents of children with special needs asking if the training methodology might be adapted for their situation. Among the messages was a brief text from Sergeant Wilson. "My grandson saw the article. He's asking about your dogs. Ready to talk when you are." Lucas sat on his porch, the 5 German shepherds arranged around him in casual alertness rather than formal formation. Something fundamental had shifted in his understanding of purpose and connection. The skills forged in combat that had once seemed useful only for destruction had proven vital for preservation. The discipline that had kept him isolated was now building bridges to a community that needed exactly what he could offer. Shadow approached, resting his head on Lucas's knee, in the gesture that had first connected them during Lucas's darkest days after returning from deployment. The shepherd's steady gaze communicated what Lucas had always found most healing about his canine partners: presence without judgment, support without demands, purpose without complication. "New mission parameters, team," Lucas told the shepherds quietly, "expanding operational objectives." 1 week later, the front page of the Pinehaven Community Herald featured a photograph of 5 German shepherds in perfect formation, with Aidan Mason kneeling beside Shadow and Michael Chen standing nearby, one hand lightly touching Valor's fur. The headline read, "Guardian Angels on 4 Paws, How Service Dogs Are Building Bridges Between Veterans and Community." The article detailed Lucas's program and the 2 remarkable rescues, but focused primarily on the unexpected development that had emerged from these events. A new training initiative integrating veterans with PTSD into the process of preparing service dogs for children with special needs. The shared experiences of navigating overwhelming sensory input, managing triggered responses, and finding security in predictable routines created a unique foundation for mutual understanding. The final paragraph quoted Lucas, one of the few times he had allowed his own words to appear. "Service dogs bridge the gap between what we can't control and what we can manage. They don't fix what's broken. They help us navigate around the broken parts until we find new pathways forward. Sometimes those pathways lead us back to connection with others who understand without explanation." At the cabin that had once been his fortress against the world, Lucas hosted an open house for potential program participants. Veterans interested in working with the dogs, parents exploring support options for their children, and community members curious about how they might contribute. Shadow, Valor, Liberty, Scout, and Ranger demonstrated their skills with professional precision, yet with a new dimension of connection that extended beyond their handler to the wider circle of visitors. Aidan Mason proudly showed Michael Chen how to give commands to Ranger, the youngest shepherd, while Sarah and the Chens discussed the remarkable impact the dogs had made on their sons. Sheriff Bennett and Lieutenant Diaz conferred with Lucas about formalizing a regional SAR support protocol that would integrate the service dogs into future emergency responses. Dr. Winters, Lucas's therapist, who had come to observe this remarkable evolution in her patient, stood beside Eleanor Simmons on the cabin porch. "When I first started working with Captain Reeves, he could barely tolerate a trip to the grocery store," she confided to the journalist. "Now look at him. He's building something that extends far beyond his own recovery." Eleanor nodded thoughtfully. The most powerful healing often comes when we stop focusing exclusively on our own wounds and start using our scars as qualifications to help others. As Lucas watched the interactions unfolding across his property, veterans connecting with children, parents sharing resources, community members offering support, he recognized that the isolated sanctuary he had built was transforming into something altogether different. Not an outpost of solitary recovery, but a base camp for mutual healing expeditions. The 5 German shepherds moved through the gathering with purpose and presence, their disciplined training now serving a mission broader than Lucas had ever envisioned. Like their handler, they had found purpose not despite their specialized training, but because of it. Their ability to navigate challenging terrain, making them perfectly suited to guide others through difficult landscapes, both physical and emotional. And that's how a pack of German shepherds surrounding a crying child became the catalyst for healing an entire community, connecting veterans with purpose, children with understanding, and a solitary man with the community he had been unable to rejoin until 5 extraordinary dogs showed him the way. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel for more inspiring true stories of unexpected heroes and the lives they transform. Share this video with someone who might need a reminder that sometimes help comes in forms we never expected, and healing often begins when we reach beyond our own pain to connect with others. Let us know in the comments what unexpected connection has changed your life. And remember to hit that notification bell, because tomorrow we're bringing you another remarkable story about an unlikely friendship that saved not just one life, but an entire town.